I'm Andy Mack here. Thank you so much for joining us. We're getting some of these images in of some of the 12 victims that tragically lost their lives as well earlier today. I want to put this up in full as well as a rocket attack on a football ground in the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights killed 12 people, including children, on Saturday. And we want to learn more about this and maybe what Israel plans to do in next regard. We're going to be joined right now by senior fellow from the FDD, David Daoud. Thank you so much for joining us here on Live Now from Fox. And maybe what can you tell us about what happened from 24, 48 hours ago and maybe how Israel could respond to this?
Thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure as usual. Wish it were under better conditions. So part of Hezbollah's routine daily attacks that have been going on since October 8th, when they started this war of attrition against Israel in support of their terrorist allies in the Gaza Strip, Hezbollah was firing rockets into northern Israel. They targeted this community, the civilian community in Majd al-Shams, a city in the Golan Heights. And one of the rockets, a Falak rocket, which is provided by Iran, happened to land in this soccer field where children were playing. This is why all of the victims were children, teenagers, all the way down to 10 years old. I don't know if Hezbollah necessarily intended to target these children, but there's an assumption of the risk that you take as an organization if you're firing thousands of projectiles into Israel over the course of many months, sometimes 6, 7, 10 attacks a day. This was bound to happen. Hezbollah took that risk, and they need to suffer the consequences. From the Israeli side, as part of this war of attrition, there's been generally a tit for tat with some kind of minor punctuations of escalation. Now, that is an acceptable dynamic for this war of attrition when you haven't killed 12 children. I think this is an attack of a different kind. Again, whether Hezbollah intended it or not, this was part of the inevitable consequences of what they were doing. And the Israelis are still convening and trying to decide on how to respond. I don't expect it to be a response that looks like everything the Israelis have done so far, but there are different factors that can come into play.
And when you talk about a response, is it something that potentially could happen in the next few days? Does it take longer to happen? What's the kind of timeline could we be looking at?
Well, again, it's hard to predict because there are a lot of moving parts, not least of which is United States support for a move that the Israelis may have to take, but which the United States may fear could widen the conflict. There was a report by Axios reporter Barak Ravid earlier today that said that Amos Hochstein, U.S. envoy to Lebanon and the Middle East, our special envoy, who's been doing the shuttle diplomacy between Beirut and Jerusalem, was telling Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant that a strike in Beirut, which theoretically would be an appropriate response to Hezbollah's murder of 12 children, would widen the confrontation, and it's something the United States doesn't want. So as the Israelis are taking the decision of what to do and when to do it, I think they have to take into consideration all these moving parts, including the possibility that a retaliatory strike will widen the conflict.
Yeah, and when you talk about the widening of the conflict, we talk about Hamas there with October 7th, but Hezbollah is much more powerful, very different from them. Maybe how does that weigh into the factor? How much does that kind of factor into making this decision on what the response looks like?
I don't think the Israelis have necessarily anything to fear when it comes to Hezbollah's military capabilities. It's not to say that Hezbollah isn't a capable actor, isn't a lethal actor. As you noted, it's more powerful than Hamas, but the Israelis have the military upper hand by a long shot. We're talking about one of the most powerful militaries in the world. But of course, I think the Israelis would prefer a peaceful resolution to the situation in the north rather than a war with Hezbollah, which promises to be very destructive despite the advantage that the Israelis have.
All right, that is a very, very interesting. My other question is, because we talk about this, a strike happens, those 12 kids tragically losing their lives, and Hezbollah maybe denies that it was them as well. How does that kind of work out, and how does both the United States, Israel, the world kind of understand who actually fired that rocket?
This is par for the course for Hezbollah, this obfuscation, this playing with reality. I think part of it is to maintain their image as this noble resistance organization that doesn't kill children. even though in their ideology, killing Israeli children is considered permissible. But they want to maintain this image, and it's also signaling to the Israelis, mea culpa, we didn't intend this, so let's kind of keep things contained. But if I'm not mistaken, the Israelis earlier today released their findings on the trajectory of the rocket. This isn't something that is esoteric. It's easy to find out where the rocket came from, who is responsible for it. It's very clearly Hezbollah. I think the United States has also accepted that it is Hezbollah's responsibility. European powers have called for an independent investigation. I think that's their way to split the difference. But it's obvious to all involved that Hezbollah was responsible. I think some may want to play the game along with Hezbollah to avoid this larger conflagration, but the responsibility is obvious.
All right, of course. Let's continue on, because we know that the war cabinet there in Israel met today. Netanyahu, there's a tweet there from the prime minister to convene there the Security Council this evening in Tel Aviv, but it's not necessarily the only meeting he's had. He's been in the United States. He met with Congress, had his speech there, met with Biden, Harris, and Trump as well. Does that have anything involved in this? How does that kind of weigh into what's going on in that world? Because it was his first trip abroad since October the 7th. What do we make of this trip and the proximity to this latest attack?
I think the proximity is in and of itself coincidental, obviously, but I think it will have an impact on how Israel responds. Whatever happened in those talks, particularly with the administration, predated the attack, but I think Prime Minister Netanyahu, sensing where the administration's feelings are on a variety of issues, the continuation of the war in Gaza, dealing with the situation in the north, is obviously going to impact the Israeli response. When we think about Israel going to war, taking military action, we shouldn't confuse it with how the United States goes to war. We are the world's only hyperpower, for lack of a better word. Yep. We don't have to take into consideration the same constraints that a small country like Israel has to.
Yeah, that is a very good point. And I do have to ask you, and you made a good point, that those meetings in the United States came before this attack. Did we learn anything from Netanyahu's speech, from anything that he had in terms of the conversations with the Biden administration? Did we learn anything about the support? And maybe if we can learn anything, then what's to come?
I mean, the speech was, pretty typical Benjamin Netanyahu, eloquent, a lot of the talking points that we're used to from him, reemphasizing the importance of the U.S.-Israel relationship, not too different from the speeches we've seen, the 3 prior speeches he's given in Congress. In terms of his meetings with the administration, again, nothing really new there. Reemphasis by President Biden, Vice President Harris, the importance of the U.S.-Israel relationship, but also concern for the humanitarian conditions in Gaza, reemphasizing the administration's desire to see this war end, a ceasefire deal, a hostage release, but namely to see the war end. So I think that, those 2 factors will be weighing on Prime Minister Netanyahu's mind, that the administration has signaled that it does not want the Gaza confrontation to continue, let alone the widening of that confrontation into a second front. I don't know how that will change, given that, again, 12 children were just murdered. This does grant Israel more legitimacy to do with Hezbollah what it's needed to do since October 8th, when Hezbollah began attacking. But it remains to be seen if the administration will respond to that.
Okay, and several of the families of American hostages also at the White House, meeting with the Biden administration, meeting with Netanyahu as well. And there were also reports earlier this week that we might have been as close to a ceasefire deal as we've ever been since October 7th. Is that now gone? Is the ceasefire talks, is that put a little bit of a wrinkle into it with this latest attack?
Not from what I've seen. As far as I'm seeing, David Barnea, the head of Mossad, was just in Doha. Talks are continuing. These are 2 separate things. I think, again, the administration has made it clear that they want to see these talks continue. The Israelis wouldn't really have the luxury to back out, given their dependence on U.S. support for the continuation of their campaign in Gaza, and just the need for general American diplomatic support. Hezbollah may want this ceasefire deal to go through very quickly, because they've tied the cessation of their attacks to a ceasefire in Gaza. And I think right now, they want the excuse to climb down from the tree.
All right, that is very interesting. All right, David, any parting words, anything else that we really didn't touch on that you want to make note with our audience before I let you go?
I think just keep eyes on the Israeli cabinet's decision. The expectation that this confrontation between Israel and Hezbollah can remain contained, I think, is a tad bit naive. Both on the belligerent side, I think if the Israelis and Hezbollah probably overestimated their own ability to keep this contained, which is always one tragic mistake away from conflagration. And the Israelis may now take an action that has to be of a different kind from what happened in the past, but that may be too much for Hezbollah to tolerate, and then we end up in a cycle of escalation. So keep eyes on the Israeli cabinet decision. Keep eyes on the north.
And like you said, that is hard to predict potentially what comes next in terms of their decision. All right, David, thank you again. I appreciate your time, your insight on this region and the developments in the war in Israel. Thanks again.
My pleasure.
All right, thank you so much. All right, let's continue on here on Live Now from Fox. Great conversation there about that. A very tragic event over the weekend. 12 children killed there in the Golan Heights area of that part of Israel. I do want to put up just this tweet, some of the names of those individuals identified in this rocket strike. As young as 12 years old, losing their lives, the deadliest attack on civilians since October the 7th. The war cabinet in Israel with Prime Minister Netanyahu meeting. So we're following the latest here on Live Now from Fox, and fears of escalation continue to permeate the region. I'm Andy Mack. We're back after this.